September 14, 1874. 4:00 in the afternoon. Canal Street, New Orleans, Louisiana. A former Confederate general stands in the middle of the street, commanding hundreds of armed black soldiers. His name is James Longstreet. The same man who fought at Gettysburg for the South now leads a militia of black veterans and integrated police against his former brothers in arms. Across from him, 8,000 white supremacists march forward with rifles, pistols, and a cannon. They are the White League, Confederate veterans who refuse to accept that the war is over. They refuse to accept that black men now vote, hold office, and carry guns legally. The smell of gunpowder hangs in the humid Louisiana air. Snipers crouch on rooftops along Canal Street, their rifles aimed at the outnumbered government forces below. The sun beats down on both armies as they face each other in the heart of America's most diverse city. On one side, 3,500 metropolitan police officers and state militia members, most of them black men who fought for the Union just 9 years earlier. On the other side, an army of white rage organized into military companies with professional discipline. They came to overthrow the government. They came to end Reconstruction. They came to restore what they call white supremacy. These black soldiers standing with Longstreet are not afraid. They are veterans of the United States colored troops. They survived slavery, survived the Civil War, and now they stand armed and uniformed, defending the government they elected. Some of them are Louisiana Native Guard, the first black military unit in American history. They wear police badges and carry Springfield rifles issued by the state. They have legal authority. They have the law on their side. They have the governor's orders to disperse this mob. But the White League does not care about law. At 4:00 p.m., shots ring out across Canal Street. The battle begins. For the next 3 hours, two armies fight a pitched battle in the streets of an American city. When the smoke clears, the White League has won. They occupy the state capitol for 3 days. They force the governor to hide in a federal building. They seize control of New Orleans. And then they do something even more shocking. They build a 30-foot-tall monument celebrating their victory. A monument that praises white supremacy in bold letters carved in stone. That monument stood in downtown New Orleans until 2017. 126 years. While the names of those black soldiers who fought and died defending democracy were erased from every textbook, every memorial, every history book. This is the story they tried to bury. This is the truth they rewrote as a riot. This is your stolen history. By the end of this video, you will know 4 truths that will change everything you thought about American history. First, black Americans during Reconstruction did not just vote. They had armed militias, black police forces, black mayors, black lieutenant governors, and black governors. They had power, real power, legal power backed by guns. Second, the Battle of Liberty. Place was not a riot, it was a coup. It was an armed insurrection by Confederate veterans who lost the war but refused to accept defeat. They used terrorism to overthrow a democratically elected government. Third, they built a monument glorifying this act of domestic terrorism and kept it standing in public for 126 years. While your children learned lies in school, that monument stood as a threat. A reminder of what happens when black people gain power. Fourth, this was not an isolated incident. This same pattern repeated over 100 times across the South from 1865 to 1925. Colfax in 1873, where 150 black men were massacred. Wilmington in 1898, where they overthrew another black government. Tulsa in 1921, where they burned Black Wall Street to ashes. Every single time black people built political or economic power, white supremacists used mass violence to destroy it. This is not ancient history. This happened in your great-great-grandparents' lifetime. The men who led the White League lived into the 1930s. Their children wrote your history textbooks. Their grandchildren run your cities today. After this video, You will understand why the wealth gap exists, why voting is still suppressed, why police still kill unarmed black people with impunity. Because the same forces that won at Liberty Place in 1874 never stopped winning. They just changed their tactics. Let me take you back to understand who these black soldiers were and why 8,000 white supremacists needed an army to stop them. From 1865 to 1877, Louisiana had the most powerful black political leadership in American history. Not just voters, not just symbolic representation, real power. PBS Pinchback became the first black governor of any American state in December 1872. He served for 35 days as acting governor. Before that, he was lieutenant governor and president of the state senate. He was also elected to the United States Senate, though racist politicians in Washington refused to seat him. But Pinchback was not the first black man to hold executive power in Louisiana. That honor belongs to Oscar James Dunn. Dunn was born into slavery, freed himself, worked as a plasterer, and became lieutenant governor in 1868. He actually served as acting governor for 39 days in 1871, more than a year before Pinchback. He was president of the Metropolitan Police, with a budget of nearly $1 million. He controlled who had guns, who had authority, who had power in New Orleans. Think about that for a moment. A man born into slavery controlling $1 million police force just 6 years after the Civil War ended. A black man with legal authority over armed officers in a city full of Confederate veterans. The Louisiana State Militia included thousands of black soldiers. These were not untrained civilians. These were veterans of the United States Colored Troops who had fought in the Civil War. They had military discipline, combat experience, and legal authority from the state government. They wore uniforms. They drilled in formation. They were commanded by black officers. The Metropolitan Police Force was integrated. About 15% were black officers. They carried guns legally and had arrest powers over white citizens. Superintendent Badger, a white Union Army veteran and decorated soldier, commanded them. But black officers walked the streets of New Orleans with badges and weapons, enforcing laws that protected black citizens. The 1868 Louisiana Constitution was written by black delegates. It guaranteed voting rights for all men, regardless of race. It created a public school system. It mandated racial equality in public transportation and licensed businesses. This was not symbolic. This was law backed by armed black militia and integrated police. In the Treme neighborhood of New Orleans, the Free Creole community had built a political powerhouse. Economy Hall became their meeting place, where they organized, strategized, and planned. These were not formerly enslaved people learning politics for the first time. These were free black people who had owned property and businesses for generations. Now they had the vote and the guns to protect it. Governor William Pitt Kellogg, a white Republican, was elected in 1872 on the strength of black votes. He appointed black men to positions of power across the state. Hundreds of local officials throughout Louisiana were black. In many parishes, black voters were the majority of registered citizens. This was the world white supremacists could not tolerate. Black men ruling over white men. Black police arresting white criminals. Black legislators passing laws. Black militia protecting black communities. To the former Confederates, this was worse than military defeat. This was the complete inversion of the racial hierarchy they had fought a war to preserve. So in July 1874, they formed the White League, not in secret like the Ku Klux Klan, openly, publicly, with newspaper advertisements recruiting members. Their founding document declared that giving black men the vote was a mistake. They said black people were trying to drive white men from Louisiana and turn it into another Haiti. They called for white men to unite in defense of their families and civilization. They pledged to defend their hereditary civilization and Christianity against what they called stupid Africanization. This was not fringe thinking. This was mainstream opinion among white Louisianans. Thousands joined immediately. Before they attacked New Orleans, the White League perfected their tactics in the countryside. In Caddo Parish, in the summer of 1874, they killed 10% of all black men in the area. Not criminals, not lawbreakers. Just black men who had the audacity to vote Republican. Albert H. Leonard, editor of the Shreveport Times, used his newspaper to openly call for the murder of Republican leaders. He urged white men to spread terror through the black community. This was not hidden. This was published in a newspaper. Across rural Louisiana, White League companies would ride into towns with 1,000 armed men. They would surround the courthouse or city hall. They would force Republican officials to resign at gunpoint. Often, they would murder those officials even after they resigned. The worst example came on Easter Sunday, 1873 in Colfax, a small town in Grant Parish. After a disputed gubernatorial election, black freedmen and state militia occupied the courthouse to protect the Republican government. A mob of white men, armed with rifles and a cannon, attacked. Most of the black defenders were killed after they surrendered. Nearly 50 more were executed that evening after being held prisoner for hours. Estimates of the dead range from 62 to 153 black men. Only 3 white men died. Many bodies were thrown into the Red River to hide the evidence. Others were buried in mass graves. The White League wanted to erase proof of what they had done. Captain William Ward, a black militia commander, had written to Governor Kellogg begging for reinforcements. Help never came in time. Ward survived, but watched his men slaughtered. Nearly 100 white men were arrested. Only 9 were prosecuted. Not one was convicted of murder. This was the message the White League sent across Louisiana. If black people organize, if they arm themselves, if they defend their rights, white supremacists will massacre them and face no consequences. By September 1874, the White League was ready to move on New Orleans. Since July, they had been recruiting volunteers. Frederick Nash Ogden, the man who had led a failed raid on the Cabildo in March 1873, took command. Within weeks, he had assembled between $5,000 and 8,000 armed men in and around the city. On September 14th, at 4 in the afternoon, the White League made its move. They declared that D.B. Penn, a Democrat who had lost the governor's race, was now the legitimate governor. Penn issued orders calling up the state militia to remove what he called usurpers from power. He appointed Ogden as general of the Louisiana militia. This was not protest. This was insurrection. This was an attempted coup. The White League issued a statement promising black citizens that their rights and property would be protected. This was a lie. They knew from Colfax and Caddo Parish that black people who resisted white supremacist takeovers were killed. Governor Kellogg, the legally elected governor, responded by ordering his military commander into action. That commander was James Longstreet. Longstreet had been a lieutenant general in the Confederate Army. He had been Robert E. Lee's most trusted subordinate. He had commanded troops at Gettysburg, Antietam, and Fredericksburg. After the war, he did something almost no other high-ranking Confederate officer did. He accepted defeat. He joined the Republican Party. He supported black civil rights. He believed in political equality regardless of race. For this, his former comrades branded him a traitor. They said he had betrayed his race. But Longstreet did not care. When Kellogg made him head of the Louisiana State Militia and commander of the Metropolitan Police, Longstreet took the job seriously. He issued orders mandating political equality before the law for all races. Now he stood on Canal Street facing 8,000 of his former brothers, in arms with 3,500 men, most of them black. He was outnumbered more than 2 to 1. The White League had been preparing for this battle for months. While the mass meeting took place on Canal Street, their military companies assembled at Eagle Hall at the corner of Britannia and Urania Streets. They marched downtown in disciplined columns. They erected defensive barricades at Poydras Street. They positioned snipers in buildings overlooking Canal Street. This was not a mob. This was a coordinated military operation. The Metropolitan Police formed their defensive line near where Harrah's Casino stands today. Superintendent Badger positioned his men with cannons and newly acquired Gatling guns. The Metropolitans were well-trained and superbly armed. They had better weapons than most of the White League, but they were outnumbered and surrounded. Before the battle began, the White League cut every telegraph line leading out of the city. No word of what was about to happen could reach Washington or the federal troops stationed elsewhere in Louisiana. New Orleans was isolated. At 4:00 p.m., Longstreet led his force toward the White League position to disperse them. He had orders from the governor to break up the illegal assembly. The White League did not disperse. They opened fire. The Battle of Liberty Place had begun. Gunfire erupted across Canal Street. The Metropolitan Police fired their Gatling guns into the White League ranks. The cannons boomed. Snipers on rooftops picked off government forces from above. The sound of thousands of rifles firing echoed through the city. The Black Militia fought with everything they had. These men knew what defeat meant. They had seen what happened at Colfax. They knew the White League would not show mercy. They fought not just for the government, but for their lives, their families, their freedom. But the numbers were overwhelming. The White League had more than twice as many men. They had snipers in elevated positions, giving them tactical advantage. They had Confederate veterans who had fought in the biggest battles of the Civil War. As the scale and strength of Ogden's army became clear, Longstreet's forces began to fall back. The Metropolitan Police and Black Militia fought a fighting retreat. When it became obvious they could not hold, they scattered. Many fled to their homes, terrified that the White League would massacre them in the streets. Others worried about their families. The White League had a history of burning homes and killing the wives and children of black resistors. James Longstreet was shot possibly by a spent bullet. He fell or was pulled from his horse. Some accounts say the White League took him prisoner, though this is unlikely. What is certain is that the government forces were defeated. By early evening, the White League controlled New Orleans. They seized the State House. They occupied the Armory. They set up checkpoints throughout the city. For all practical purposes, they had overthrown the government. Governor Kellogg fled to the Custom House on Canal Street, which was federal property. A company of U.S. Army troops protected the building. The White League knew that attacking federal property would bring the full weight of Washington down on them. So Kellogg remained safe inside, while outside the White League ruled the streets. The battle lasted about 3 hours. Estimates of casualties vary, but about 100 people were wounded. The exact number of dead is unclear because the White League controlled the city and controlled the information. The next day, rumors spread that 2,000 black men were gathering in Tremé to counterattack. The White League mobilized to crush any resistance. The rumor turned out to be false, but the message was clear. Any black person who resisted would be killed. For 3 days, the White League occupied New Orleans. They installed their own government. They forced Kellogg's administration out of the State House. Louisiana effectively had 2 governors, one legal and one installed by armed insurrection. Then the federal government finally acted. President Grant ordered troops to New Orleans. General Irvin McDowell led Army units into the city. The ironclad warship USS Colorado and gunboats Kansas and Shawmut sailed from Key West under Admiral James Robert Madison Mullaney. Faced with federal military power, the White League backed down. On September 21st, they surrendered control of the city. Governor Kellogg returned to his office. But this was not a defeat for the White League. It was a demonstration of power. They had proven they could seize an entire city. They had proven the state government could not protect itself without federal intervention. They had proven that black political power only existed as long as the U.S. Army was willing to enforce it. And most importantly, they faced no consequences. Not one member of the White League was prosecuted for insurrection. Not one was arrested for attempting to overthrow the government. Not one faced trial for shooting at police and militia. The White League kept their weapons. They kept their organization. They kept growing. They controlled most of rural Louisiana already. Now they had shown they could take the capital city whenever they wanted. 2 years later, the White League won completely. In the disputed election of 1876, Democrat Francis T. Nichols claimed victory as governor. While politicians negotiated in Washington about the presidential election, the White League acted on the ground in Louisiana. They used violence and intimidation to ensure Democratic victory. The Compromise of 1877 ended Reconstruction. Federal troops withdrew from the South. The protection that had allowed black political power to exist was removed. In Louisiana, the White League became the official state militia. The same men who had attempted a coup in 1874 now had legal authority. The same organization that had massacred black people at Colfax now controlled state military power. What happened to the black leaders and soldiers who had stood on Canal Street, James Longstreet, was vilified by his former Confederate comrades for the rest of his life. They called him a traitor to his race for commanding black troops. He died in 1904 still believing he had done the right thing. The black militia of Louisiana was violently disbanded. Many of its members were hunted by the KKK and White League. Some were murdered. Others fled Louisiana entirely. Oscar Dunn, the first black lieutenant governor, died suddenly in November 1871 under suspicious circumstances. Many believed he was poisoned. No investigation was ever conducted. PBS Pinchback, despite being elected to the United States Senate, was never allowed to take his seat. Racist politicians in Washington refused to recognize a black senator from Louisiana. He spent years fighting for recognition that never came. He eventually moved away and died in Washington, D.C. in 1921. The records of the black militia were systematically destroyed or hidden. Their names disappeared from official documents. Their service was erased. Textbooks were rewritten. The era of black political power was renamed the era of Negro rule and described as a time of corruption and chaos. The White League was recast as liberators who saved Louisiana from incompetent black leadership. The Battle of Liberty Place was renamed a riot as if both sides were equally at fault. But the cruelest insult came in 1891. The White League erected a monument on Canal Street celebrating their victory. The monument explicitly praised the white supremacy they had fought to restore. It stood as a threat and a reminder. A message to every black person in New Orleans that their brief moment of power was over and would never return. That monument stood for 126 years. It wasn't removed until 2017. 4 generations of black children grew up walking past a monument that celebrated the violent overthrow of their ancestors' government. 4 generations learned the lie that white supremacist terrorists were heroes. Meanwhile, not one monument was erected to Oscar, Dunn PBS Pinchback, William Ward, James Badger, or any of the black soldiers who fought to defend democracy on September 14, 1874. Their names were erased. Their sacrifice was forgotten. Their story was buried. Until now. You might be thinking that the Battle of Liberty Place was unique, a one-time uprising that happened because of the chaos after the Civil War. That is what they want you to believe. But the truth is, this happened over and over and over again across the entire South. Every single time black people gained power, white supremacists used mass violence to destroy it. Let me show you the pattern. 15 months before the Battle of Liberty Place, the same forces attacked in rural Louisiana. The location was Grant Parish, a small county in central Louisiana. The disputed gubernatorial election of 1872 had created 2 rival governments, just like it would later in 1874. In Grant Parish, Black freedmen and state militia occupied the courthouse to protect the Republican government they had elected. They were led by black veterans and local leaders who understood that without physical defense, their political rights meant nothing. For weeks they held the courthouse. They built fortifications. They posted guards. They sent desperate letters to Governor Kellogg begging for reinforcements. Captain William Ward commanded Company A of the 6th Infantry Regiment of the Louisiana State Militia. His men were black veterans who knew how to fight, but they were outnumbered and isolated. On Easter Sunday morning, April 13, 1873, a white mob attacked. They numbered in the hundreds. They came with rifles, pistols, and a cannon. They surrounded the courthouse. They set it on fire. The black defenders held out as long as they could. When the smoke and heat became unbearable, when they ran out of ammunition, they surrendered. They came out waving white flags. They laid down their weapons. They thought the rules of war would protect them. They were wrong. The white mob executed them. Most were shot immediately after surrendering. Nearly 50 more were held prisoner for hours before being murdered that evening. Estimates of the total number killed range from 62 to 153 black men. Only 3 white men died in the battle. The white mob threw many bodies into the Red River to hide the evidence. Others were buried in mass graves that were never properly documented. The massacre was designed to send a message across Louisiana. If black people organize to defend their rights, they will be slaughtered. Nearly 100 members of the white mob were arrested. Only 9 were prosecuted. The case went all the way to the Supreme Court. In United States v. Cruikshank, the court ruled that the 14th Amendment did not protect black citizens from violence committed by private white citizens. All the defendants were released. Not one was convicted of murder. This ruling opened the floodgates. It told white supremacists across the South that they could murder black people with impunity. The federal government would not protect black citizens. State governments controlled by black people could not protect them without federal support. And private white militias could use terrorism without consequences. 25 years after Colfax, they did it again. This time in a major city. This time with even more planning and coordination. Wilmington was North Carolina's largest city. It had a multiracial government, elected by a coalition of black Republicans and white populists called fusionists. The city had black aldermen, black magistrates, and black police officers. Black businesses thrived. There was a black-owned newspaper called the Daily Record. White supremacist Democrats could not tolerate this. For months before the 1898 election, they planned their takeover. They formed white supremacy clubs across the state. They recruited a paramilitary group called the Red Shirts to intimidate black voters. Newspaper editors like Josephus Daniels of the Raleigh News and Observer published racist propaganda, calling black political power Negro domination. On November 8th, Election Day, the Red Shirts attacked polling places. They stuffed ballot boxes. In some districts, the Democratic vote total exceeded the number of registered voters. Through fraud and violence, Democrats won control of the state legislature. But that was not enough. 2 days later, on November 10th, 1898, they moved on Wilmington. A mob of 2,000 armed white men assembled. They were not a disorganized rabble. They were organized into military companies with commanders. Many were Confederate veterans. Their leaders included prominent businessmen, lawyers, and former government officials. They marched to the offices of the Daily Record and burned it to the ground. Then they went through black neighborhoods, shooting anyone they saw. They destroyed black-owned businesses. They burned homes. They drove thousands of black residents out of the city. At gunpoint, they forced the mayor and city council to resign. They installed their own government. This was not a riot. This was a coup d'etat, the only successful overthrow of an elected government in American history. The official death toll was listed as 14 black people. But eyewitness accounts and later investigations put the real number between 60 and 300. Many bodies were dumped in the Cape Fear River. Many more were buried in unmarked graves. The white supremacists who led the coup remained prominent figures in North Carolina politics for decades. Some served into the 1920s. Not one was ever arrested. Not one was prosecuted. Not one faced any consequence for overthrowing a democratic government and murdering hundreds of people. For 100 years, North Carolina textbooks called this event the Wilmington Race Riot. They described it as black people attacking white people. They blamed the victims. Only in the 2000s did historians and the state government officially recognize it as a massacre and a coup. By 1921, Black Americans had learned they could not trust white governments to protect their rights. So they built their own. They created all-black towns. They built their own businesses, their own banks, their own schools, their own hospitals. The most successful was Greenwood, a neighborhood in Tulsa, Oklahoma. They called it Black Wall Street. It was the wealthiest black community in the United States. Picture this: 35 city blocks of black-owned businesses, doctors, offices, and law firms, grocery stores and hotels, theaters and restaurants, 2 newspapers, 2 black hospitals, a dozen churches, mansions with indoor plumbing and chandeliers, black people driving luxury cars. Per capita, there were more black millionaires in Greenwood than in Beverly Hills. This was what black people could build when given the chance. This was what freedom looked like. This was what economic independence created. And white Tulsa could not stand it. On May 31, 1921, a black teenager named Dick Rowland was accused of assaulting a white woman in an elevator. The accusation was almost certainly false, but the white newspapers screamed for his blood. A white mob gathered outside the jail demanding that Rowland be lynched. Black World War I veterans, many of them armed, came to the jail to protect Rowland. They had fought for democracy in Europe. They were not going to let a lynch mob operate in America. A confrontation happened, and shots were fired. What happened next was not a riot. It was a coordinated military assault on an entire community. A mob of 10,000 white people stormed into Greenwood. They were deputized by the city government and given permission to attack. They went block by block, house by house, business by business. They looted everything of value. Then they burned it all to the ground. White firefighters stood by and watched. Police arrested black people trying to defend their homes and businesses. The National Guard, when it finally arrived, did not protect Greenwood. They helped round up black people and put them in internment camps. And here is the part that shocks people. Private planes flew over Greenwood, dropping incendiary bombs. This was the first aerial bombing of an American city. They used airplanes to attack American citizens. When the smoke cleared, 35 city blocks were completely destroyed. 256 homes burned. 400 more were looted. Every single black business was destroyed. 2 black hospitals, 12 churches, all the schools, all gone. Over 10,000 black people were left homeless. The property loss was equivalent to $31 million in 2017 dollars. Accounting for a century of economic growth, each family lost millions in generational wealth. The official death toll was listed as 36, but witnesses described trucks hauling bodies away in the night. Mass graves have been discovered in recent years. Historians estimate that 300 or more black people were murdered. After the massacre, Tulsa changed its fire codes. They made it impossible for black people to rebuild on their land unless they met expensive new requirements. Insurance companies refused to pay claims to black policyholders. The city tried to seize the land through eminent domain, and then they erased it from history. The Tulsa Race Massacre was removed from Oklahoma textbooks. For 75 years, 3 generations of students learned nothing about it. Children grew up in Tulsa not knowing that their city had committed one of the worst acts of racial terrorism in American history. The story was only widely known again after a state commission investigated in the 1990s. By then, almost all the survivors had died. They lived their entire lives watching their city pretend it never happened. Just 18 months after Tulsa, they did it again. This time, they did not just destroy the town. They erased it from the map entirely. Rosewood was a small town in rural Levy County, Florida. It was a prosperous black community. Black families owned land and homes. They had businesses, a school, churches. They lived independently, farmed their own land, and built wealth. On January 1st, 1923, a white woman in nearby Sumner, a white town, claimed she had been attacked by a black man. Like Tulsa, the accusation was almost certainly false, but it gave white men the excuse they needed. A mob of several hundred white men from Sumner and surrounding areas descended on Rosewood. For an entire week, they hunted black people. They burned nearly every structure in the town. Homes, businesses, churches, all destroyed. Black residents fled into the nearby swamps and hid. Women, children, and elderly people spent days hiding in freezing water, surrounded by snakes and alligators. Some were eventually evacuated by train and car to larger towns like Gainesville. Many never returned. The official death toll was 6 black people. But eyewitnesses said the real number was between 27 and 150. Bodies were hidden. Evidence was destroyed. The exact number will never be known. No arrests were ever made. Not one white person was prosecuted. The massacre was simply allowed to happen. Rosewood was abandoned. None of the former residents, black or white, ever moved back. The town ceased to exist. For 70 years, no one talked about it. It was not taught in Florida schools. It was not mentioned in history books. An entire town was wiped off the map and erased from memory. Elaine, Arkansas, September 30th to October 9, 2019. 2 years before Tulsa, 4 years before Rosewood, it happened in Arkansas. This time, the crime was not political power or economic success. The crime was organizing a union. Black sharecroppers in Phillips County, Arkansas, lived in conditions barely different from slavery. They worked white-owned land and were paid whatever the white landowners decided to pay them. Most ended each year deeper in debt, despite working from sunrise to sunset. In 1919, cotton prices soared. Landowners were making record profits. But the black sharecroppers who did all the work saw none of it, so they organized. They formed the Progressive Farmers and Household Union of America. Their goal was simple. They wanted fair payment for their cotton. They wanted to break free from the debt bondage that kept them enslaved in all but name. Some even dreamed of buying land of their own. On the night of September 30th, 1919, about 100 black farmers met at a church in Hoop Spur, 3 miles north of Elaine. They posted armed guards to protect the meeting because they knew organizing was dangerous. 2 white deputy sheriffs and a black trustee showed up to spy on the meeting. Shots were exchanged. 1 white deputy was killed. It was never determined who fired first. The black trustee raced to Helena, the county seat, and reported that black people were staging an insurrection. Within hours, hundreds of armed white men formed posses and began hunting black people. For 3 days, white mobs rampaged through Phillips County. They shot black people on sight. Men, women, children, it did not matter. If you were black, you were a target. The violence spread beyond Union members. 4 brothers, David Gibson, Lewis, and Leroy Johnston, prominent black men who had nothing to do with the Union, were returning from a hunting trip. A white posse pulled them off a train and murdered all 4. Their bodies were left on the side of the road for days as a warning. Federal troops were called in. They came with 500 soldiers, rifles, and machine guns. But instead of stopping the massacre, they joined it. Troops rounded up black people, forced them into freight cars and makeshift prisons, and shot anyone who resisted. The official death toll was 11 black people and 5 white people, but eyewitnesses gave estimates ranging from 100 to 856. Historian Ida B. Wells estimated 80 died just on the first night. Today, historians believe at least 200 and possibly hundreds more black people were killed. After the killing stopped, 67 black people were indicted for inciting violence. 12 black sharecroppers, who became known as the Elaine 12, were sentenced to death. The all-white juries deliberated for just minutes per case. Many of the convicted men had been tortured into confessing. Not one white person was arrested. Not one was prosecuted for murdering hundreds of people. The white posse members and federal troops who participated in the massacre faced no consequences. Look at what just happened. 5 events spanning 50 years. 5 different states. But the exact same pattern every single time. Black people organize for political power. White supremacists use terrorism to overthrow them. Black people build economic independence. White supremacists destroy it and steal the wealth. Black people form unions to demand fair wages. White supremacists massacre them. Black people arm themselves for self-defense. White supremacists call it insurrection and bring overwhelming force. After each massacre, they call it a riot. They blame black people for the violence. They erase it from textbooks and memory. This was not random violence. This was not spontaneous. This was systematic. This was policy. Every single time black people built wealth, they destroyed it. Every single time black people held political power, they used terrorism to take it. Every single time black people armed themselves for protection, they called it rebellion and brought armies. These were not the only massacres. There were over 100 similar attacks across the South from 1865 to 1925. Thousands of black people killed, billions of dollars in wealth destroyed, entire communities erased. This was not accident. This was not isolated incidents. This was genocide. You might be wondering how something this big could be hidden. How can you massacre thousands of people across 100 different events and make an entire nation forget? How can you erase entire towns from history? How can you build monuments to terrorism and keep them standing for over a century? The answer is simple. They used a 4-part system. Physical destruction to eliminate evidence, legal suppression to prevent justice, educational control to brainwash children, and media manipulation to blame the victims. Let me show you exactly how they did it. After each massacre, they immediately destroyed all proof it happened. In Tulsa, every property record was burned. Black families who had owned their homes and businesses for decades suddenly had no legal proof. Deeds disappeared. Tax records vanished. When survivors tried to file insurance claims, they had no documentation. The insurance companies used this as an excuse to deny every single claim. But even families with intact policies were denied. The insurance companies invoked riot exclusions. They said the policies did not cover damage caused by riots. By calling the massacre a riot, they gave insurance companies legal cover to refuse payment. In 1931, the Oklahoma Supreme Court heard a case from 2 Tulsa property owners whose buildings were destroyed. A theater and a hotel, both insured, both completely burned. The insurance company denied the claims, citing the riot exclusion. The court sided with the insurance company. The verdict was directed for the insurer. Black property owners in Tulsa received nothing. Think about what this means. Black families had paid insurance premiums for years. When white terrorists destroyed everything they owned, the insurance companies kept the money and denied the claims. This was theft on top of theft. In Rosewood, they did not just destroy the evidence. They destroyed the entire town. Every building was burned. every structure demolished. The town ceased to exist on maps. For 70 years you could not find Rosewood in any official record. It was as if the town and everyone who lived there had never existed. After Colfax bodies were thrown into the Red River, others were buried in mass graves with no markers. The exact death toll will never be known because they hid the bodies. Witnesses were intimidated into silence. Anyone who tried to testify about what they saw was threatened with death. In New Orleans, after 1877, all records of the Black Militia disappeared. The names of the soldiers who fought at Liberty Place were erased from official documents. Their service was deleted from military rolls. Today, historians cannot even tell you the full names of most of the black men who stood on Canal Street, facing down 8,000 white supremacists. Oscar Dunn, the first black lieutenant governor of Louisiana, died suddenly in November 1871 under suspicious circumstances. Many believed he was poisoned. No investigation was ever conducted. No autopsy was performed. The most powerful black politician in Louisiana just died mysteriously, and no one in authority cared to find out why. This was the first layer of suppression. Destroy the physical evidence, eliminate the documentation, hide the bodies, silence the witnesses. But physical destruction was not enough. They needed the law on their side. The most devastating blow came from the Supreme Court in 1876. United States versus Cruikshank was the case that came out of the Colfax massacre. Remember, nearly 100 white men were arrested for murdering over 100 black people. Only 9 were prosecuted. Those 9 made it to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court ruled 5-4 that the 14th Amendment did not protect black citizens from violence committed by other private citizens. Chief Justice Morrison Waite wrote that the 14th Amendment only restricted what state governments could do, not what individuals could do. Read that again. The 14th Amendment was passed specifically to protect black citizens after the Civil War. But the Supreme Court said it only applied to state action, not private action. This meant white mobs could murder black people, and the federal government could not prosecute them. State governments controlled by white supremacists certainly would not prosecute them. The court also ruled that the Bill of Rights did not apply to the states. The First Amendment, the Second Amendment, none of it restricted what state governments could do to their citizens. States could ban black people from speaking, assembling, or bearing arms, and it would not violate the Constitution. All 9 defendants in the Colfax case were released. Not one served time for participating in one of the worst massacres in American history. This ruling opened the floodgates. It told white supremacists across the South that they could use violence against black people without federal consequences. It told state governments they could pass any discriminatory law they wanted. And they did. Between 1890 and 1910, every former Confederate state passed new laws designed to eliminate black political power. They called them Jim Crow laws. Poll taxes required payment to vote, which poor black people could not afford. Literacy tests required voters to read and interpret complex legal documents, which most black people who had been denied education could not do. But these tests were administered by white officials who passed illiterate white people and failed educated black people. Grandfather clauses said, you could only vote if your grandfather had voted. Since black people's grandfathers had been enslaved and could not vote, this eliminated most black voters while allowing illiterate white people to vote. These laws were designed with surgical precision. They did not explicitly say black people cannot vote. That would be unconstitutional. Instead, they created requirements that looked neutral but were designed specifically to disenfranchise black people. And it worked. In Louisiana, in 1896, there were 130,000 registered black voters. By 1904, there were 1,342. In 8 years, they eliminated 99% of black voters through legal mechanisms. After black people lost the vote, They lost all political power. White supremacist Democrats controlled every level of government. They passed more laws segregating schools, parks, transportation, restaurants, hospitals, everything. They legalized convict leasing, which allowed states to lease black prisoners to private companies as forced labor. This was slavery in all but name. The legal system became a weapon. After the Elaine massacre in Arkansas '67, black sharecroppers were arrested. 12 were sentenced to death. Not one white person was arrested for murdering over 200 black people. Instead, the victims were prosecuted for defending themselves. This was the second layer of suppression. Use the courts to legalize oppression. Strip away constitutional protections. Pass laws that look neutral but target black people specifically. Turn the justice system into an instrument of white supremacy. The physical evidence was destroyed. The legal system was corrupted. But they needed one more thing. They needed future generations to believe the lie. Enter the United Daughters of the Confederacy. Founded in 1894, the UDC was an organization of white Southern women dedicated to rewriting history. They called their version the Lost Cause. According to the Lost Cause, the Civil War was not about slavery. It was about states' rights. The Confederacy was not fighting to preserve slavery. They were defending their homeland from Northern aggression. Enslaved people were not brutalized. They were happy and well treated. Reconstruction was not a period of black political advancement. It was a time of corruption and Negro rule. All of this was a lie. But the UDC spent decades embedding these lies into American education. Mildred Lewis Rutherford served as Historian General of the UDC from 1911 to 1916. She gave speeches telling the daughters they were protectors of the true story of the Old South. She wrote guidelines on what textbooks should teach. She created lists of approved and banned books. The UDC reviewed every history textbook used in Southern schools. If a textbook said slavery was wrong or that the Confederacy fought to preserve it, the UDC lobbied to ban that book. If a textbook mentioned black political leaders during Reconstruction, the UDC demanded it be removed. If a textbook called Confederate leaders traitors, the UDC made sure that book was never used. They succeeded. By the 1930s, the Lost Cause version of history dominated not just Southern textbooks, but Northern textbooks too. Publishers discovered they could not sell textbooks in the South unless they conformed to Lost Cause mythology. So Northern publishers created separate editions for Southern states. These editions depicted enslaved people as happy and content. They mentioned Jefferson Davis and Robert E. Lee as many times as Abraham Lincoln and Ulysses S. Grant to maintain balance. The entire Reconstruction era was rewritten. Black political power was described as a disaster. Black legislators were portrayed as ignorant and corrupt. The White League, the KKK, and other terrorist organizations were described as redeemers who saved the South from black rule. Events were renamed. The Battle of Liberty Place was a coup d'etat, but textbooks called it a battle. The Colfax Massacre was mass murder, but textbooks called it a riot. The Tulsa Race Massacre was terrorism, but for 75 years, Oklahoma textbooks called it the Tulsa Race Riot. By changing the name, they changed who was blamed. A riot implies both sides were at fault. A massacre makes clear who the victims were. Many events were erased completely. Rosewood did not appear in Florida textbooks until the 1990s. Tulsa was removed from Oklahoma textbooks for 3 generations. Children whose grandparents survived the massacre learned nothing about it in school. The Wilmington Coup was not called a coup in North Carolina textbooks until the 2000s. Teachers who tried to teach the truth were fired. Textbook authors who included accurate information were blacklisted. The UDC maintained strict control over what could be taught about the Civil War and Reconstruction. Not until the 1950s did academic historians begin seriously challenging lost cause mythology. But it took decades for that scholarship to reach classrooms. Mississippi did not adopt an honest textbook about slavery and Reconstruction until 1980, after a long court battle. Even today, some states still teach watered-down versions of this history. This was the third layer of suppression. Control what children learn. Rewrite textbooks to erase Black achievement and white terrorism. Rename massacres as riots. Delete entire events from the historical record. Ensure that future generations never learn the truth. The fourth and final layer was media control. After every massacre, white newspapers immediately blamed Black people. The Colfax massacre was reported as a Negro uprising. Newspapers said, Black people attacked white people, forcing white men to defend themselves. The Tulsa Race Massacre was preceded by newspapers screaming about a Negro crime wave. They created an atmosphere of fear to justify what was about to happen. In New Orleans, the newspapers called the legally constituted Black militia insurgents. They described the White League, which was attempting a coup as patriots defending civilization. In Shreveport, editor Albert H. Leonard used his newspaper to openly call for the murder of Republican leaders and the terrorizing of Black communities. This was not hidden. This was published in a mainstream newspaper. After the massacres, white newspapers praised the killers. They called them heroes and redeemers. They said they had saved white civilization from Black domination. They built monuments to honor the terrorists. In 1891, the New Orleans city government erected a 30-foot-tall obelisk on Canal Street, celebrating the White League's victory. The inscription explicitly praised white supremacy. It described the coup as a moment when white people united to restore civilization. That monument stood for 126 years. In 1974, the city added a plaque saying the sentiment of white supremacy was contrary to modern New Orleans, but the monument stayed up. In 1981, Mayor Ernest Dutch Morial tried to remove it. The city council blocked him. Instead, they agreed to remove the words white supremacy from the inscription as a compromise. For generations, Black children walked past that monument on their way to school. They saw a celebration of the violent overthrow of their ancestors' government. They saw their city honoring the people who had murdered Black soldiers and destroyed Black political power. The monument became a rallying point for white supremacists. The KKK held rallies there. Neo-Nazis gathered there. In 1993, civil rights icon Reverend Avery Alexander was tackled by police while protesting at a Klan rally held at the monument. Not until April 24, 2017, was the monument finally removed. It took until 2017 to remove a monument explicitly celebrating white supremacy from a major American city. The removal happened before dawn, under police protection, with officers wearing bulletproof vests and snipers watching for threats. There were so many threats of violence that they had to remove it secretly in the middle of the night. Meanwhile, no monuments were ever built to Oscar Dunn, none to PBS Pinchback, none to the Black soldiers who defended democracy at Liberty Place, none to the sharecroppers murdered at Elaine, none to the residents of Greenwood who lost everything, none to the people of Rosewood whose town was erased. The message was clear. White terrorists get monuments. Black heroes get forgotten. This was the complete suppression system. Destroy the physical evidence. Use the courts to legalize oppression. Control education to brainwash children. And manipulate the media to blame the victims. For 150 years, this system worked. Most Americans knew nothing about these massacres. Most Americans believed the lost cause version of history. Most Americans thought Reconstruction failed because Black people were incapable of self-government. But you know the truth now. You know the history now. But here is what matters most. This is not ancient history. The theft never stopped. They just changed the methods. Right now, white households have 10 times more wealth than Black households. 10 times. The median white household has $240, $210 more in net worth than the median black household. For every $100 a white family holds, a black family holds only $15. From 2019 to 2022, the wealth gap grew by 38%. The gap increased by $308, $100 in just 3 years. While everyone talks about progress, the gap is getting worse. They tell you this is because black people do not work hard enough. They say it is bad life choices. They claim it is lack of education. All lies. This gap exists because they stole your wealth. Let me show you exactly how. In Tulsa in 1921, black families owned an average of about $50,000 in property. That is $800,000 in today's money. They lost everything. If that wealth had been passed down with compound interest over 100 years, each family would have $5 to $10 million today. Instead, they have nothing. Multiply that across over 100 massacres. Add 246 years of unpaid slave labor estimated at $14 trillion. Add decades of Jim Crow convict leasing, redlining, and predatory lending. The total stolen wealth exceeds $100 trillion. This is not theory. This is documented fact. If Greenwood had not been burned, those families would be multimillionaires today. If the New Orleans black militia had not been crushed, their descendants would own that city today. If Reconstruction had not been violently overthrown, black political and economic power would have continued growing. Your poverty is not your fault. It was stolen. Right now, as I speak, black neighborhoods are disappearing. Since 1980, over 500,000 black people have been displaced from gentrifying neighborhoods. 500,000. The pattern is the same as 1874, 1898, 1921. Black people build a community. They invest in homes and businesses. Then white people move in property values, skyrocket taxes increase, and black people are pushed out. Washington, D.C., New York City, Philadelphia, New Orleans, Atlanta, San Francisco. In every major city, black neighborhoods are being erased. They call it revitalization. They call it urban renewal. But it is the same thing they did in Wilmington, Tulsa, and Rosewood. Take black land and wealth. The only difference is now they use zoning laws and tax increases instead of torches. But the result is the same. Black people lose their homes. Black people lose their wealth. Black people lose their communities. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery. But it included one exception. Slavery is still legal as punishment for crime. Right now, 2.3 million people are incarcerated in America. Black people are 12% of the population, but 32% of prisoners. In Louisiana, black people are 32% of the state, but 61% of prisoners. In Mississippi, black people are 37% of the state, but 56% of prisoners. These prisoners work. They make office furniture process, food answer customer service calls. They are paid between 13 cents and 52 cents per hour. Some states pay nothing at all. This generates $2 billion in profits every year. This is slavery. Legal slavery. The same state that refused to punish the White League for massacring black people now imprisons black people at the highest rate in the world and forces them to work for pennies. And just like after Reconstruction, prisoners lose the right to vote. 13 states permanently disenfranchise people with felony convictions. Millions of black people cannot vote because of mass incarceration. This is the modern version of poll taxes and literacy tests. The connection is direct. Convict leasing began immediately after Reconstruction ended in 1877. When they could no longer legally own slaves, they created a system to re-enslave through imprisonment. That system still operates today. They are still suppressing your vote. Since 2013, when the Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act, states have closed over 188 polling places. Most closures happen in black neighborhoods. Georgia closed 214 polling places. 7 counties in Georgia have only 1 polling place for the entire county. Voter ID laws block millions from voting. 7% of eligible voters do not have valid photo ID. For Black citizens, it is 12%. For young people, it is 15%. Nearly 20% of registered Black voters do not have IDs that meet strict requirements. These laws are designed exactly like poll taxes and literacy tests. They do not explicitly say Black people cannot vote, but they create barriers that disproportionately affect Black communities. In states with strict voter ID laws, turnout drops significantly in Black communities. The barriers work exactly as intended. This is not accident. This is the same strategy used in 1890, 1900, 1910. When Black people gain political power, they use law and violence to take it away. Black people are killed by police at 3 to 5 times the rate of white people. Young Black men aged 25 to 29 are killed at a rate 3 times higher than young white men. Of all Black people killed by police, 31% are between ages 18 and 29, despite that age group being only 12% of the Black population. 4% of Black people experience police misconduct in their interactions with police. Black people are searched, arrested, and subjected to use of force at dramatically higher rates than white people. The police evolved from slave patrols. Their original purpose was to control and terrorize Black people. That purpose has never changed. They just wear different uniforms now. And just like the White League faced no consequences for their terrorism police, who kill unarmed Black people, rarely face prosecution. The system protects them, just like it protected the White League, just like it protected the Tulsa mob, just like it protected every white supremacist who murdered Black people. Look at the pattern. They could not call it slavery, so they called it prison. They could not call it the White League, so they called it police. They could not call it a coup, so they called it law and order. They could not call it land theft, so they called it gentrification. They could not call it disenfranchisement, so they called it voter ID requirements. Every method changes, every name changes, but the goal is the same: control Black people. Extract Black wealth. Suppress Black political power. Maintain white supremacy. If your family lived in New Orleans in 1874, this affected you. If your ancestors built wealth in Tulsa, it was stolen from you. This is why your grandmother cleaned white people's houses instead of owning her own business. This is why your family rents instead of owns. This is your stolen inheritance, and they are still stealing it. Now let me tell you who you really are. You are not victims. You are not poor because you are lazy. You are not struggling because you are inferior. You are survivors. Survivors of the Middle Passage where 2 million died. Survivors of 246 years of slavery. Survivors of over 100 massacres. Survivors of Jim Crow, convict, leasing, lynching, redlining, mass incarceration. They tried to break you. They failed. You are still here. Your ancestors were not helpless. They were warriors. They were the Black militia in New Orleans, who faced 8,000 white supremacists with rifles in their hands. They were the defenders of Colfax, who held the courthouse until they ran out of ammunition. They were the residents of Tulsa, who fired back when terrorists came for them. They were the sharecroppers in Elaine, who organized a union, knowing it could get them killed. After slavery ended within 10 years, they built schools, churches, businesses, newspapers. In 1870, Black people owned 0.5% of Southern land. By 1910, they owned 15%. They did this while facing the KKK, the White League, and lynching every single day. Your ancestors built empires from nothing. They created the wealthiest Black community in American history. They elected governors, lieutenant governors, senators, congressmen, judges, sheriffs. They commanded armed militias with legal authority. They did all this facing terrorism every single day. Over 4,000 lynchings from 1877 to 1950. Over 100 massacres. Millions of individual acts of violence. The constant threat of death every time they left their homes. And they still built wealth, still gained power, still raised families, still maintained dignity. That strength is in your blood. That resilience is in your DNA. That refusal to quit is your inheritance. Ask yourself this: why did God preserve you? Why did God bring your ancestors through the Middle Passage when 2 million died? Why did God keep them alive through 246 years of slavery? Why did God protect them through over 100 massacres? Why did God sustain them through Jim Crow lynching and terror? Why are you here today when they tried everything to erase you? Because you have a mission. Because you have a purpose. Because there is work to be done that only you can do. Your mission is to reveal truth. Tell these stories they tried to bury. Teach your children what schools will not teach. Expose the lie of equality when the theft continues. Make them face what they did. Your mission is to demand justice. Not ask, demand. Reparations are not charity. They are debt. They owe us $26 trillion just for slavery. Add the massacres, the stolen property, the Jim Crow-era theft, and the total exceeds $100 trillion. They paid reparations to Japanese Americans for internment camps. They paid reparations to Holocaust survivors. They paid reparations to Native Americans. But for 246 years of slavery, plus 100 years of terrorism, plus ongoing theft, they have paid nothing. This is not a request. This is not negotiable. This is what is owed, and we will collect. Your mission is to reclaim what was stolen. Reclaim your history. Reclaim your wealth. Reclaim your power. Reclaim your land. Reclaim your voice. They burned Greenwood, but they cannot burn the knowledge of how it was built. They destroyed Rosewood, but they cannot destroy the determination that created it. They overthrew the New Orleans government, but they cannot overthrow the spirit that fought for it. Build businesses they cannot take. Build wealth they cannot steal. Build power they cannot suppress. Build knowledge they cannot erase. Every dollar you earn is a victory. Every business you start is an act of resistance. Every child you educate is revenge against erasure. Every vote you cast is a refusal to be silenced. They want you to give up. They want you to believe you are inferior. They want you to accept poverty as your fault. They want you to stay silent about what they did. Do not give them what they want. You are the keeper of this truth. You are the continuation of Oscar Dunn PBS, Pinchback, the Black Militia of New Orleans, the Defenders of Colfax, the residents of Greenwood, the sharecroppers of Elaine. Their blood runs through your veins. Their fight is your fight. They survived so you could be here. Honor them by knowing their story. Honor them by continuing their fight. Honor them by refusing to be erased. If this truth hit you, if this made you angry, if this made you proud, do not let this moment pass. Comment truth below. So I know you watched this entire video. Let me see how many people are ready to face reality. Share this video with someone who needs to wake up. Share it with your family. Share it with your church. Share it with people of all backgrounds, because everyone needs to know this truth. They erased this from textbooks for 150 years. They removed monuments to terrorism only 7 years ago. They are still trying to keep you from learning your own history. Do not let them succeed. Subscribe to this channel because there are hundreds more stories like this. Every week I will bring you another piece of your stolen history. Every week I will show you another truth they tried to bury. Tell your children this story before they learn the lies in school. Teach them about Oscar Dunn and PBS Pinchback. Teach them about the black militia who stood on Canal Street with rifles defending democracy. Teach them about Greenwood before it burned. Teach them that their ancestors were not victims, but warriors. You are the keeper of this truth now. Do not let them erase it again. Now start a prayer for justice. Let us pray. God, we thank you for preserving our ancestors through the fire. We thank you for the strength that carried them through the Middle Passage, through slavery, through terror, through massacre, through erasure. That same strength flows through us today. We pray for justice delayed, but not denied. We pray for reparations owed and soon to be collected. We pray for the truth that cannot be buried, no matter how deep they dig. God, give us the courage of our ancestors. Give us their determination. Give us their refusal to be silenced. Give us their vision of a world where black people are truly free. We pray for those still fighting, still resisting, still building despite the theft, still voting despite the suppression, still teaching despite the erasure, still here despite everything they did to destroy us. We are still here. We are still building. We are still fighting. And we will not stop until justice is done. In the name of our ancestors, in the name of truth, in the name of justice, we pray. Amen.